Okay, so this is going to be my first philosophical type of contribution to the FMK dialogue, both on the blog and perhaps on the YouTube channel. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my thoughts regarding competition and aggression in mainstream culture. And I'm not going to specify just American culture, although it's strongest in the United States. But I think at this point, the viral nature of it, it's going global. So, I guess I want to start by saying that about a week ago, I contacted Sifu Freddy and asked him if I could somehow be a part of what he was doing. And one of the reasons that I was prompted to do that at that particular point was that he had just posted a video where he was discussing how he thought he would eliminate the rank system from FMK and just focus on practice and people that wanted to practice and enjoy the martial arts as a lifestyle. And I had an immediate response to that. I've been watching Sifu Freddy's YouTube channel for probably a month or so. I've reviewed a lot of the videos. I have a long drive back and forth to work every morning. It's about an hour drive one way, and so on my drive I would often play some of the philosophy videos, listen to them, and I was very interested in a lot of things that Sifu Freddy had to say. So anyway, yeah, I responded to that idea that we could build a family of martial arts practitioners that were just interested in the lifestyle of it, in the practice of it, and didn't really care about rank and all of that. And so I contacted Sifu, and here I am participating. So where I live I'm in southern Alberta, and I teach at a tribal college called Red Crow Community College, and actually I not only teach there, but I coordinate a program called Ganai Studies, which is a post-secondary program that's based in the Blackfoot knowledge paradigm instead of the mainstream Western, the familiar knowledge paradigm in North America. So everything we do is out of that Blackfoot paradigm. And I have a different perspective on things coming from that paradigm. One of the issues that Sifu Freddy raises quite a bit is his disgust with the UFC and cage fighting and mixed martial arts in general, and his opinion that that these are given a bad name to the martial arts, that they're not martial arts at all, that what's going on is a bunch of competition and violence and that the values that are being supported through this sports fighting is not the values of the martial arts, and that the martial arts are being misunderstood, and that a lot of schools are turning toward supporting the MMA as a way to make money. So the notion that competition and aggression are important factors in the mainstream culture is something that I've dealt with before. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, and I've done some research, some interesting research about it. It's my own work, and I wanted to talk just a little bit about that research to make a point. And I'll start off with a bit about the psychologist Abraham Maslow. When I first started teaching at Red Crow, I got a large research grant from the Canadian Council of Social Sciences, or the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, I should say, SHIRC. And the question that I posed was, how has Blackfoot thinking shaped Western society? Because I believe that it has. You know, every year, even up to today, but for the last century or so, Blackfoot communities have had visiting scholars from various universities, people that are working on their MAs or their PhDs or their postdocs or whatever, coming into the communities and doing research, going out, writing their papers, building their careers. But some of that work that's been done has certainly filtered into mainstream Western knowledge and experience. And so I was interested in what respects Blackfoot, specifically Blackfoot knowledge or culture, has shaped Western society. And one of the case studies I took on had to do with the psychologist Abraham Maslow, because I'd heard a shadow of a story that his famous hierarchy of needs was basically shaped by his own interpretation of Blackfoot teepee designs. And so I dug into the story, and my colleague / in-law and I, Narcissus Blood, really put a lot of time into thinking about reading Maslow's work, looking into the archives, contacting his colleagues, and researching this story and thinking about what went on at that time. And what we came out with was a really thorough story. I'm not going to tell it here because it takes a couple of hours to tell it, but I do have versions of it online. Narcissus Blood, who is my colleague and in-law, he and I have been all around North America to different universities telling this story, because it's, you know, Abraham Maslow was a really famous psychologist who changed the Western world in big ways, and this is part of that history that they don't know. And so we've made some ripples telling this story, and we've told it in really prestigious places, and to members of the American Psychological Association, not only members but administrators and such of the American Psychological Association. And yeah, we've been around telling this story. The next place we're going to be telling this story is going to be Spokane, Washington, on September 14th. at a conference called the Tree of Healing. There are versions of this story, the way that we tell it online, the full versions. You can go to the Blackfoot Digital Library, which is online, and just Google Maslow and you'll come up with one of our presentations. You can go to the web page for the program that I coordinate called Kainai Studies. It's Kainai Studies.com. Look in the media files there, you'll find a version of it. On my YouTube channel there's a version of the telling. Every place we go, they usually film us and then we get a copy of the filming, and so I try to put that online somewhere. We haven't written up the story. We like to tell it orally. We may be making a documentary of it soon, but I'm just going to give you a little glimpse of it here because it's relevant to the discussion that's going on the FMK's site about the MMA. And it's relevant because Abraham Maslow was really concerned with the competition and aggression of Western society. He did his doctoral training in Wisconsin under the psychologist, another famous psychologist, Harry Harlow, and they were studying primates. They were doing primate psychology, so they were working with monkeys and apes. One of the things that Maslow noticed in his work in Wisconsin was that all of these different species of monkeys and apes had kind of social hierarchies, and that the social hierarchies were defined by relationships of dominance and submission, and that those hierarchies were put in place and kept in place by acts of aggression, basically rapes. So the most dominant members of any particular primate species were the ones that were the biggest rapists, and the ones that were on the bottom of the hierarchy were the ones that were the most submissive. So after that study in Wisconsin, through which he got his PhD, Maslow moved to New York, and he began teaching at Brooklyn College, but he was trying to get into a circle of famous scholars at Columbia University. And developing from his study with the primates, he thought he would test it on human beings, which he considered primates as well. And so he put together a survey called the Social Personality Index, which is still being used today, and it's a two-part survey. And the first part asks very leading questions that leads the researcher to understand the level of ego security of the person who's answering the questions. So it'll be questions like, do you think you're a better person than so-and-so, and you know, who's the biggest thief, you know, or the biggest liar, you know. Ask these kind of questions so that you're talking about yourself and you're writing, you're responding about yourself in comparison to others. And then it goes into the second part of the questionnaire, and that is focused on very intimate details of your sex life. And so Maslow administered the Social Personality Index mainly to college students at Columbia University, which was then Columbia College, and he found a correlation that he thought was the same as what he had seen in monkeys and apes, which was that among the students, those who rated with the highest degree of ego security also tended to have the most experimental sexual lives, and those who rated with a low ego security had very conservative personal lives. So Maslow proposed a universal from this, he thought that all primates, including human beings, were naturally aggressive and competitive, that every society built social hierarchies, and that these hierarchies were put in place and kept in place by acts of aggression and relationships of dominance and submission. And at the time he was doing this study at Columbia, one of the people that he really wanted to get to know was an anthropologist named Ruth Benedict, who's very famous. And Ruth was hosting a colloquia, a group of meetings with people from different disciplines of knowledge, trying to tackle some of the problems with Western society, combining their different disciplines of knowledge to look at those problems. And one of the key problems that they were dealing with was the competitive aspect of Western society, and how do we eliminate that competitive, aggressive aspect of it. Ruth, being an anthropologist, was thinking that you could draw off of other cultural systems from other places in the world to learn how they did things differently and adopt some of those into Western culture in order to change that aggression. Maslow was invited to participate in this colloquia, and when he learned of this question, of this inquiry, what he said was, well, you can't change it, because that's just our nature as primates. We're competitive, we're aggressive. I've studied it in all kinds of different monkey and ape species, and I've studied it among human beings now too, and I can tell you that we all do this, and that our whole society, the societies that we build, the organization of these societies is based on this competition and aggression and relations of dominance and submission. And when Ruth heard this, she said, Abraham Maslow was just a young guy, and she said, before you go, spouting off about this big universal that you've discovered, maybe you need to go step foot in another culture and see if your theory holds true. So she sent Maslow to Blackfoot country. She sent him to the Siksika Reserve, which is by Calgary here in Alberta. It's the northernmost of the 4 Blackfoot communities, and all of the Blackfoot communities are interrelated. So this was 1938, and he went up there with a small research team. And again, I'm not going to go through all the specifics of the story, but if you want to hear it, to know, to confirm that what I'm saying is accurate, I suggest you go online and look at some of the presentations that I've given, where I do tell the more thorough story and the research behind it. Basically, when Maslow came onto the Blackfoot Reserve and tried to administer his social personality index, he hit a wall. And the wall that he hit was that people were not willing to talk bad about each other, and they certainly weren't willing to talk about their very intimate sexual lives. But foremost, they weren't willing to talk bad about each other, and they didn't really even understand why he was asking the questions, why he would ask them, if they felt better about themselves than other members of society, if they thought that they were better people than other members of Siksika society. They didn't understand why he was asking the questions, but more than that, they refused to answer them, and they actually threatened to kick him off of the reserve if he continued asking those questions. And Maslow was floored. He was floored for a couple of reasons. One, um, because they weren't responding to these questions. They refused, which he'd never seen before. But moreover, the people that he met, and he met a lot of people up here, the people that he met, he said 80 to 90% of them have a really strong, secure, confident sense of self. Their ego is very healthy, and yet they refuse to put others down in order to validate that sense of self. And he'd never seen that before, and so it blew him away, and he didn't know what to make of it. One of the places that we presented this story, we ran into one of Maslow's old-time friends, and she told us that toward the end of his life, he talked about this whole event with her, and what he said to her in his exact words was that this experience shook him to his knees, because he really thought he had figured something out about human beings, and he was completely wrong. So right away, he started trying to figure out what it was, what there was going on in Siksika that made people so different. He saw them as really psychologically healthy people, and yet there was none of the competition and aggression. In fact, it was the opposite. There was a lot of generosity. He writes about the generosity quite a bit in his books and his papers. He talks about instances where he witnessed people coming to a public gathering and individuals bringing all of their worldly possessions, everything they own, and giving it away to people in their society. He talks about a guy named Teddy Yellowfly who owned the only car at Siksika in 1938. And what it meant to own the only car at Siksika was that he bought the car and he had to pay for the maintenance of the car, but everybody used the car. It was a community car. It wasn't just Teddy that got to drive it. Everybody got to use it. So, these things really stymied Maslow. He didn't know what to think about them. He put it in context of his own terms. He said, if I went out in New York and I brought all of the things that my wife and I owned out on the street and I gave it away, well, I'd just be homeless and poor. But somehow in Blackfoot society that didn't happen. What he saw were the people that were really generous in Blackfoot society. When they needed something, all they had to do was even mention it, sometimes not even mention it, and they would have it. They would have help. This he called organizational synergy, and this becomes a part of the training now for business management. It's what's behind all of the things that have been going on in business since the 60s, where they try to convince employees that they're part of a family, that they're part of a team, and they give them stock in the company, they give them more creative input in the company, and make them feel like they're part of it. That was all Maslow's influence that came out of this synergy idea that came from the Siksika Reserve. The other thing that he kind of focused on was, when he was at Siksika, was the way that children were treated. In Western society, in the mainstream, children are treated like they're not even human. They're some kind of lesser being. They're not quite human yet. And in Blackfoot society, children are respected as full social members. And so he gives a lot of examples of the way children were treated differently, that they weren't just treated as children per se, but they were considered full social members and respected, and they made their own decisions a lot of times. Um, and he looked a little bit into spirituality and what was going on there, and whether spirituality played a part in what he was observing. But in the end, he left that summer and he didn't quite figure it out, but he knew he was onto something. He had seen a different kind of social psychology where the vast majority of the members of a particular society were really psychologically healthy, but they didn't have any of the competition, any of the aggression. And so that very following, September, when they started the next school semester, he started a class called Normative Human Psychology. It's the first class in normal human psychology that's ever been offered anywhere in North America. He started that, and he based it on what he saw at Sigma. He also started a series of notebooks called the Good Human Being Notebooks, and in this he left his science methodology behind completely and decided he was going to be a intuitive learner from now on. And what he was doing in the Good Human Being Notebooks was looking at all the members of Western society historically that he thought had the same qualities as the majority of the population at Sigma, and trying to look into their background, their biographies, and figure out what they had in common. He did this research for about 5 or 6 years, and then he came out with his first model of the hierarchy of needs. He continued his research another several years, and then you see the idea of self-actualization and this come out. His prototype for the self-actualize was the standard member of Sigma, the way that they are. They have a strong ego security, they're confident, but they don't have to put other people down to get there. And so for the rest of his life, really Maslow tried to figure this out, what was going on, and he came out with his theories, the hierarchy of needs, came out with his descriptions of self-actualization. He's the first psychologist to write anything about spirituality in psychology, and he came out with his work on organizational synergy, and where he contracted himself to different corporations to try to make them more synergetic. But one of the things that my colleague/in-law, Narcissus, and I observed, or kind of figured out in all of this, is that Maslow missed something very important. And he missed it because he's a member of the mainstream society. He couldn't see it. And it's rarely ever seen, rarely ever understood, at least grasped. And that is the relationship to place. That's what he missed. His psychological theories would be completely different if he understood the relationship to place. When you look at a tribal society like Sigma, what you got to understand is that these people consciously know that all of their ancestors for all of time have lived in this particular place together. They know consciously that all of their descendants for all of the future are going to live here together. They know consciously that they themselves are going to live here with the people that they're living with for the rest of their lives. The people that you're growing up with, you're going to know for the rest of your lives. It's not like Western society where you're thinking, these people that are at my job or at my school or whatever, I'm going to know them for this period of time, then I'm moving on. Yeah, I guess my rant got too long and I didn't realize that the camera shut off, and I just kept going, but I went back and looked at where it stopped. So yeah, the relationship to place is what Maslow missed. So in an indigenous society, you know that the people that you're living with are the people that you're going to live with forever. You might go off and work somewhere for a couple of years, but you're always going to come home. Your teachers that you grow up with are going to be in your life forever. Most of the time, they're related to you. They're family. Even if they're not blood related or married related, if you enter like a Blackfoot knowledge discipline, for instance, it's much like Kung Fu, where your teacher then becomes your father, your mother, your grandfather, your grandmother, and you enter into another family. And depending on how many different teachers you have in your life, and you're going to have more than one, you're going to be involved in a lot of different families. And these families, these webs of relationships, link society together so that everybody's family. And this is understood in a traditional society. And not only among human beings, but between humans and animals and the ecology of the place, right? So you know that all of your descendants are going to be living in this place for as long as the future is of human life. And so so you do your best not to damage that ecology. In fact, you do your best to try to help that ecology thrive. And you recognize, in most indigenous cultures, you recognize that human beings are even the most recent arrivals here. The ones that have lived here longer and know how to live here better are the animals, and so that's who you learn from. That's the real teachers behind all of the knowledge systems. So if you have a knowledge system that's just completely invented by human beings, maybe don't trust that knowledge system. Look for something that's grounded in a lesson that's come from spirits, animals, plants, the place itself. In the mainstream culture, which is the moving culture, you don't have this at all. This viral global culture that's going on is all about disposability. And people are trained their whole lives from the very start in disposability. And so, from grade 1, you're taught that close relationships are not good. So if you have a good friend who's sitting by you and you're talking and you're laughing, you're having a good time and you're visiting, you're going to get split up. Probably by grade 2, they'll recognize, oh, these two guys are friends, we need to put them in different classes, we need to split up that relationship. Don't want close relationships. Consciously you're trained that the people that you're going to school with, they're not going to be in your life forever. They're going to be here for this brief period of time, this 1 year, and then they're going to be gone. You don't have to worry about them, including your teacher. They're going to be gone. You don't got to worry about them. If you got a real big problem, you just move schools. Just get out of that school, go to a different school. And the same thing carries, by the time you're graduating, you're thinking, you might be like getting senioritis, and you might be depressed at this point, and you might be thinking, I don't want to do this anymore, and people will tell you, hey, you just got this little bit of time left, finish up, and then you don't have to deal with these people anymore. Don't worry about the bullies, don't worry about the teachers you don't like and all that stuff, because as soon as you're done, you don't have them in your life anymore. You're going to go off, you're going to work, you're going to go do whatever. So, have fun and enjoy it, and then take off and do your own thing and forget about all of this. The same thing carries into adulthood, right? This disposability. So, if you're having a problem at work, it's not really a problem. You quit your job and go get another job. If you got a problem with your marriage, quit your marriage, you go get another one. This is the way it is in the mainstream society. It's all about moving, mobility, and disposability, right? It's about and it's about the self. It's about I'm the guy that's important and nobody else matters, right? And I don't have to worry about what I do to my relationships here where I'm at, because things get bad, I'm gonna get out of here, go do something else. That's the sad truth. That's the way it is. And so it's, in that kind of culture, and America is like the heart of it. You look at America and the motto is independence. It's not interdependence, it's independence. And it's not just the independence of on a national level, but it's really about the individual. And so everybody's talking about freedom, protecting your freedom and all of this. And what they're really saying is, number one is the one that matters, and nobody else matters. So you can go ahead and kill people for number one. It's not because those people are doing anything to be violent to you or anything like that, but it's because you want something that they've got. Go ahead and go kill them. Go ahead and go bully your way to their resources and take what they've got, and the heck with them, because number one is the one that matters, right? Just you. This is the way of the mainstream culture. So you have this kind of culture going on, and it's been going on a long time. In North America it's been going on so long, but the virus came from somewhere else, right? To come to North America. It started somewhere. One time everybody had these indigenous type of traditional cultures that weren't like this, but somewhere along the line, number one got to be important. And so, you take a culture like this and you throw martial arts in there. You introduce Asian martial arts. And what are they going to do with those martial arts? It doesn't surprise me where they've taken it. They've twisted it, and they've made it into something that supports their own values. They've made it into a spectacle, in fact, a source of entertainment that supports the value of using competition and aggression to put yourself higher than others, right? And so that's the way that it's playing out in its most extreme form in cage fighting and the UFC and all of this. And Sifu Freddy's right. That's not the martial arts. That's not the Asian martial arts. That's something different that's going on. And it's what's happened. It's an alterity, in a sense. It's what's happened with the diffusion of Asian martial arts, that the mainstream global culture has taken that and twisted it to their own, made it fit into their own culture. And the way that it fits into their own culture is to serve those values of self-aggrandizement and aggression and competition to get to the top of the hierarchy. And so you see that played out dramatically in the UFC, where these guys will they'll start off, once a fight is going to be set, they'll start off calling each other down, talking bad about each other, and leading it up, making it dramatic, and up to the fight itself. And then one of them is going to get the crap beat out of him, and you got people cheering that on to eventually somebody's hurt, somebody's too hurt to even continue, and that's when the guy is proven that he's he's the better one, right? But you know, what he's really done is just reinforce those mainstream values. He's just a pawn to that culture, and you know, he has given up being a martial artist at that point. Even just stepping in there, you're a pawn of that culture. So yeah, so it doesn't surprise me that that's what the mainstream has done with the martial arts. You know, the question that they started off with Ruth Benedict in 1938, how do we solve this Western society's problem with competition and aggression? That question is still unsolved. Sifu Freddy's question, to me, is an interesting question, which is, how can we use martial arts to support a different set of values than what's being presented to us as martial arts through competitive fighting? And I think that's an interesting question. It's part of why I want to be a part of what he's doing, and a part of the family that he's building. So that's my basic thesis on the problem with Western society, one of the core problems, and that is the lack of relationship to place. And without that connection to place, and that long-term connection to place, and the relationality, the strong relationality that goes with it, the strong bonds that you build in the families that you become a part of as a learner. Without that, then you get what we have. And so that's basically what I think about the issue. Thanks for listening.